At a Nebraska livestock auction in 1881, Elena Garrison found herself being sold alongside chickens to pay her late husband's debts until widower Benjamin Crawford shocked the crowd by declaring, "This ain't right," and offering her something no one else would, her dignity. But when mysterious fires and sabotage threaten to destroy everything they're building together, will their fragile bond survive the forces determined to tear them apart? The sound of crying chickens filled the cold October air as Elena Garrison tried to make herself smaller on the wooden platform. Her bare feet touched the rough boards where animals usually stood before being sold. The year was 1881 in Willow Creek, Nebraska, and she never thought she would be here. Men with dirty clothes and mean eyes looked at her like she was just another thing to buy. The smell of hay and farm animals made her stomach feel sick. Her husband had died 3 months ago, leaving her with bills she could never pay. Now the men he owed money wanted her to work for free until every penny was paid back. "Step right up, folks," shouted Augustus Hartwell, the man running the sale. His voice was loud and scary. "We got some fine chickens here today, and one extra item that needs a new home." Elena's face turned red with shame. She pulled her old blue dress tighter around her body. The dress had holes in it and was the only nice thing she still owned. Everything else had been taken away to pay the bills. A woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, "Poor thing. I heard her husband lost everything gambling and drinking." The words hurt Elena's heart, but she kept looking down at the ground. The auctioneer kept talking. "This here woman can cook, clean, and work hard. She owes $47.30. Whoever buys her contract gets a worker until that debt is paid off." Elena felt tears starting in her eyes. She had never felt so alone in her whole life. Her parents were dead, and she had no brothers or sisters. There was nobody to help her now. A fat man with gold teeth raised his hand. "She looks strong enough for farm work," he said with a nasty smile. "I'll take her for $20. "We got 20, Hartwell yelled. "Do I hear 25? Another man called out, $22? She can help my wife with the washing and cooking." Elena's hands started shaking. These men were talking about her like she was a cow or a horse. She wanted to run away, but there was nowhere to go. The law said she had to work off her husband's debts, and running away would only make things worse. The bidding kept going up. Each time someone said a number, Elena felt more scared. She didn't know any of these men, and some of them looked mean. What if they were cruel to her? What if they made her work outside in the cold winter, with no coat? A young man with a beard stepped closer to the platform. "How do we know she's worth anything?" he asked. "Maybe she's lazy, or steals things." "She's got a good reputation in town," Hartwell answered. "Never heard a bad word about her character. She'll work hard for whoever's smart enough to bid." The chickens around Elena kept making noise. She wished she could trade places with them. At least they would be sold quickly and wouldn't have to feel embarrassed much longer. The sun was getting lower in the sky, making everything look orange and sad. Elena thought about her small house that used to be warm and happy. Now strangers lived there, and all her things were gone. Even her mother's wedding ring had been sold to pay bills. $30, called out a tall man with dark hair. He looked meaner than the others, and Elena hoped he wouldn't win. She closed her eyes and tried to remember better times. Last year, she had been happy with her husband, even though money was tight. They had a little garden and some chickens of their own. She never imagined she would end up like this. The auctioneer was getting excited as the price went higher. "Do I hear 32? Come on, gentlemen. This is a good deal for someone who needs help around the farm." Elena looked up at the crowd for just a second. Most of the people watching looked curious, but not kind. They probably thought this was entertaining, like watching a horse race or a dog fight. Her stomach growled because she hadn't eaten much that day. She had been too nervous and scared to want food. Now she wondered when she would eat again, and if her new owner would be generous with meals. "This ain't right." The words cut through all the other sounds, like a knife cutting bread. Everyone turned to look at who had spoken. Elena saw a tall man with some gray in his dark hair standing near the back of the crowd. She had seen him in town before but never talked to him. People called him Benjamin Crawford, and she knew his wife had died having a baby. "Now see here, Crawford," Hartwell said, his voice getting angry. "This is all legal and proper. The woman's got debts to pay, same as any man would have to do." Benjamin walked closer to the platform where Elena sat with the chickens. His boots made heavy sounds on the dirt ground. "Legal don't make it right," he said. "She's a person, not a farm animal." Elena felt something warm start in her chest. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something she hadn't felt in a long time. When was the last time someone had talked about her like she mattered? The auctioneer laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You want to pay her debts yourself, Crawford? $47.30 plus my fee. If not, keep your speeches to yourself." Some people in the crowd started talking to each other. Elena heard bits of their conversations. "Crawford's got his own problems," one man said. "3 little kids and a farm that's barely making money." Another person whispered, "He's probably just showing off. No way he's got that kind of money to throw away on a stranger." Benjamin's face looked serious and determined. Elena studied his eyes and saw something that surprised her. He looked tired and sad, like someone carrying a heavy load. But there was kindness there too. "Those children of his need a mother," an old woman said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe he's thinking practical, or maybe he's thinking with his heart instead of his head," replied her husband. "That's usually how men get into trouble." Elena felt her cheeks get hot. Were people really talking about her like she might become this man's wife? She barely knew him, but then again, she barely knew any of the men who wanted to buy her contract either. The fat man with gold teeth spoke up again. "Crawford, you're wasting everyone's time. I bid $35, and that's my final offer." "36, called another voice. Benjamin looked right at Elena for the first time. His eyes weren't mean or hungry like the other men's eyes. They looked respectful, like he saw her as a real person, instead of just a thing to own. "I've got 3 children at home," he said quietly, talking to Elena instead of the crowd. 9-year-old Catherine tries to take care of her little brothers, but it's too much for a child. 6-year-old William is scared all the time since his mama died. And Nathan? He's only 3, still asks for his mama every night. Elena's heart felt like it was breaking. She knew what it was like to lose someone important, and she couldn't imagine how hard it must be for little children to lose their mother. "What are you saying, Crawford?" Hartwell asked impatiently. "You bidding, or just telling sad stories?" Benjamin reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather bag. Elena could tell by the way he held it that it was heavy with coins. "I'll pay her full debt," he said, "but not as a purchase, as a loan. She can work it off at fair wages, with her freedom to leave if she wants." The crowd got very quiet. Even the chickens stopped making noise for a moment. Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. This stranger was offering to help her keep her dignity while still solving her money problems. "That's not how this works," Hartwell protested. "The creditors expect to sell her contract, not make some fancy loan arrangement." "The creditors want their money," Benjamin replied calmly. "They'll get every penny. How I choose to structure the deal is my business once I pay." He turned back to Elena and held out his hand. "Ma'am, if you'll accept the arrangement, you'd have your own room, fair wages, and the right to leave any time you want." Elena stared at his outstretched hand. It was rough and calloused from hard work, but it was the first kind gesture anyone had offered her in months. She thought about the 3 motherless children he had described, and something inside her made a decision. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder so everyone could hear, "Yes, I accept." As Benjamin helped her down from the platform, Elena wondered what she was getting herself into. Would his children like her? Could she really help a grieving family while earning money to pay off her debts? And why had this stranger been willing to help her when no one else would? Benjamin Crawford's boots hit the auction platform with the sound of thunder, each step echoing through the stunned silence that had fallen over the crowd. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched this stranger approach a man whose calloused hands told stories of hard work, whose silver-streaked hair caught the afternoon light like spun metal. "I'll take her contract," he said, his voice steady as granite. The crowd burst into excited whispers. Augustus Hartwell's face turned red as a turkey's wattle. "You got the money, Crawford?" Benjamin reached into his weathered coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. The coins inside clinked together like wind chimes in a storm. Elena held her breath. She had seen men promise things they couldn't deliver before. "I'll pay her debts," Benjamin announced. "But not as a purchase, as a loan. She can work it off at fair wages, with her freedom intact." Elena's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Freedom? The word tasted foreign on her tongue, like honey after years of bitter herbs. She had expected to become property, little different from the livestock around her. "That's highly irregular," Hartwell sputtered, his mustache twitching. "The creditors expect standard arrangements." "The creditors expect their money," Benjamin replied coolly. "They'll get every penny. How I choose to handle the arrangement is my business." A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Some nodded in approval, while others shook their heads in disapproval. Elena caught sight of a well-dressed man near the back, his dark eyes fixed on Benjamin with obvious displeasure. Something about his calculating stare made her skin crawl. Benjamin extended his weathered hand toward Elena. "Ma'am, will you accept this arrangement?" For the first time in months, Elena allowed herself to look directly into another person's eyes. She saw exhaustion there, lines carved by grief and worry. But beneath it all, she glimpsed something she had almost forgotten. Existed basic human decency. "Yes," she whispered, then found her voice. "Yes, I accept." His hand was warm and steady when she took it. As he helped her down from the platform, Elena noticed the crowd parting like wheat before wind. Some faces showed respect, others curiosity, and a few displayed open hostility. $47.30, Hartwell called out sharply, plus the $5 auction fee. Benjamin counted out the coins without flinching, though Elena noticed his pouch grew considerably lighter. This man was giving up what might be his last savings for a complete stranger. "Papers," Benjamin said simply. Hartwell shuffled through a stack of documents, his movements jerky with irritation. "Here's her work contract. Standard terms, she owes you labor until the debt is paid, plus reasonable interest." "No," Benjamin's voice cut through the air like an axe through wood. "We'll draw up new papers, fair wages, reasonable hours, and her freedom to leave if she chooses." The well-dressed man from the back of the crowd stepped forward. Up close, Elena could see his expensive clothes and perfectly groomed beard. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power. Cornelius Hartwell. He introduced himself with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Augustus is my brother. I couldn't help but overhear your unusual arrangement." Benjamin's jaw tightened slightly. "Mr. Hartwell, such generosity toward a stranger," Cornelius continued, his tone smooth as butter on warm bread. "Though I wonder if you've considered the practical difficulties. A single man, 3 young children, and now, this added responsibility." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She understood perfectly well what he was suggesting, that she would be more burden than help. "I appreciate your concern," Benjamin replied, his voice level but firm. "But I believe I can manage my own affairs." Cornelius chuckled, a sound like pebbles rattling in a tin can. Of course. I simply meant that if circumstances become challenging, I'd be happy to purchase the debt myself, as a favor to a neighbor." The offer hung in the air like smoke from a green fire. Elena sensed something poisonous beneath Cornelius's polite words, though she couldn't quite name what it was. "Thank you, but no," Benjamin said. "We'll be fine." As they walked away from the auction grounds, Elena glanced back to see Cornelius watching them with those calculating eyes. A shiver ran down her spine, despite the warm afternoon sun. The ride to Benjamin's farm passed mostly in comfortable silence. His wagon was old but well maintained, the horses steady and sure-footed. Elena found herself studying her unexpected benefactor from the corner of her eye. He sat straight-backed despite his obvious exhaustion, his large hands gentle on the reins. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks, the creek where wild strawberries grew, the hill where Indians had once camped, the grove of cottonwoods that marked the halfway point to town. "My children don't know you're coming," he said finally. "I should probably explain about that." Elena nodded, understanding flooding through her. They've been through enough changes. Catherine, she's 9, has been trying to run the household since her mother died, takes on too much responsibility for someone her age. His voice carried a weight of worry. William is 6, all imagination and mischief. And Nathan, Benjamin's voice softened. Nathan's barely 3, still asks for his mama sometimes. The picture he painted made Elena's heart ache. She knew about loss, about children forced to grow up too quickly. "I'll go slowly," she promised. "Let them get used to the idea." Benjamin glanced at her with something that might have been relief. They're good children, just careful around strangers these days. As they topped a small rise, the Crawford farm spread before them like a patchwork quilt. The house was modest but well built, with a wide front porch and cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. The barn looked solid, though Elena noticed several fence posts leaning at odd angles. 3 small figures burst from the house as the wagon approached. Catherine, a serious-faced girl with brown braids, held the hand of a little boy, who could only be Nathan. William ran ahead, his freckled face bright with curiosity. "Papa!" William called out. "Who's that lady?" Benjamin climbed down from the wagon and scooped Nathan into his arms. The little boy buried his face against his father's shoulder, suddenly shy. "Children, this is Miss Elena Garrison," Benjamin said carefully. "She's going to be staying with us for a while, helping around the house." Catherine stepped forward, her young face serious beyond her years. "Hello, Miss Garrison." Elena knelt down to meet the girl at eye level. "Hello, Catherine. Your father tells me you've been taking very good care of your brothers." A small smile tugged at Catherine's lips. "I try my best." William bounded over, his shyness forgotten. "Can you cook pancakes?" Catherine tries, but they always come out lumpy. "William!" Catherine scolded, her cheeks turning pink. Elena laughed, the first genuine laughter she'd felt in months. "I think I can manage pancakes, and maybe we can teach Catherine the trick to making them smooth." As they walked toward the house, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. But she also couldn't shake the memory of Cornelius Hartwell's calculating stare, or the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. 3 weeks into her stay at the Crawford farm, Elena woke to find the chicken coop door standing wide open, its wooden latch splintered as if something had torn it apart with tremendous force. Feathers scattered across the yard like snow after a blizzard, and half their flock had vanished into the Nebraska dawn. "This is the 3rd time this month," Benjamin muttered as he examined the broken latch. His calloused fingers traced the jagged wood, and Elena could see the frustration building behind his tired eyes. Catherine stood nearby, clutching a basket that should have been full of eggs for breakfast. Instead, it held only 3 small brown ovals, barely enough to feed little Nathan, let alone the whole family. "Maybe it was wolves, Papa," William suggested, though his voice carried doubt. At 6 years old, he was already learning to recognize when something didn't make sense. Elena crouched down to study the ground around the coop. The scattered feathers formed an odd pattern, too neat for wild animals. More telling were the boot prints in the soft earth human boots, not paw prints. "Benjamin," she called quietly, gesturing him over. He knelt beside her, his eyes following where she pointed. "Someone did this on purpose," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who would want to hurt our chickens?" Catherine asked, her young face creased with worry. Benjamin straightened slowly, his jaw set in a hard line. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out." As they gathered the remaining chickens and repaired the coop, Elena's mind raced. This wasn't the first strange incident since her arrival. Tools had gone missing from the barn, only to reappear days later in odd places. Fence posts had been mysteriously loosened, allowing their milk cow to wander into the neighbor's wheat field. Someone was playing a dangerous game. That afternoon, while the children napped and Benjamin worked in the far field, Elena decided to investigate. She had noticed Cornelius Hartwell riding past their farm several times in recent weeks, always slowing his horse to stare at their property with those calculating eyes. She walked the fence line carefully, looking for any signs of tampering. Near the back corner of their land, where the property bordered the main road to town, she found what she was looking for: fresh horse tracks and more boot prints. Someone had been watching them, studying their routines. A twig snapped behind her, and Elena spun around to find William emerging from a patch of tall grass, his freckled face flushed with excitement. "Miss Elena, I saw something," he whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "What did you see, William?" "Yesterday, when I was playing in the creek, I saw Mr. Hartwell, the fancy one from town, talking to two rough-looking men by the old oak tree." William pointed toward a massive tree that stood just outside their property line. "They were looking at our house and pointing." Elena's blood ran cold. "Are you certain it was Mr. Hartwell?" William nodded vigorously. He had that shiny black horse and his fancy hat. "The other men looked mean, Miss Elena. One had a scar right here." He drew a line across his cheek with his finger. "Did they see you?" "No, ma'am. I hid real good behind the blackberry bushes." Elena knelt down and placed her hands on William's shoulders. "This is very important, William. You must promise me you won't go to the creek alone anymore. And if you see those men again, you come find me or your papa right away." The boy's eyes grew wide. "Are we in danger?" Elena forced a smile she didn't feel. "We're just being careful. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, and children need to stay safe while the adults sort things out." That evening, after the children were asleep, Elena told Benjamin what William had seen. They sat on the front porch, their voices low, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "Cornelius Hartwell," Benjamin said the name like it tasted bitter. "I should have known." "You know him well?" Benjamin rubbed his forehead wearily. "Well enough. He owns the biggest ranch in the county, and he's been buying up smaller farms for years. Usually waits for folks to fail on their own, then swoops in with an offer they can't refuse." "But you're not failing," Elena observed. "No, we're not. And that's probably the problem." Benjamin's hands clenched into fists. "A successful small farm proves other folks can make it too. That's bad for his business." A cool breeze rustled the cottonwood leaves, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Elena pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What will you do?" "Keep our eyes open. Document everything strange that happens. And make sure the children are never alone outside the house." Over the following days, the pattern of sabotage became clearer. Someone had been systematically targeting everything that kept the farm running smoothly. The well pump developed a mysterious crack that caused it to lose pressure. Several rows of their vegetable garden were trampled in the night by what appeared to be horses, though they found no hoofprints leading to or from the damaged area. Elena found herself constantly watching the horizon, jumping at unexpected sounds. The children sensed the tension, and even cheerful William became quiet and clingy. One morning, Catherine approached Elena while she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. "Miss Elena," the girl said hesitantly, "are you going to leave us?" Elena's hands stilled on the wet sheet she was pinning to the line. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart?" "Mama left," Catherine said simply. "I know she didn't want to, but she did. And now there's trouble again, and I thought, maybe." Elena knelt down and gathered the serious little girl into her arms. Catherine felt so small and fragile, yet Elena knew she carried burdens no 9-year-old should bear. "I'm not going anywhere," Elena said firmly. "Your mama didn't choose to leave you, Catherine. Sometimes sad things happen that nobody can control. But I'm choosing to stay, and I'll keep choosing to stay for as long as your family needs me." Catherine's arms tightened around Elena's neck. "Promise?" "I promise," That afternoon brought their most serious incident yet. Benjamin had gone to town for supplies, leaving Elena and the children at home. She was teaching Nathan to count, using dried beans at the kitchen table, when Catherine's scream shattered the peaceful afternoon. Elena rushed outside to find Catherine standing frozen near the barn, pointing at something inside. Following her gaze, Elena saw their horse, Molly, lying on her side in the stall, breathing heavily and obviously in distress. "William, take Nathan inside and stay there," Elena commanded, her voice sharp with authority. She knelt beside the mare, running her hands along the horse's neck and sides. Molly's breathing was labored, and her eyes showed white around the edges, sure signs of severe colic. Without immediate treatment, the horse could die. But as Elena examined Molly more closely, she found something that made her stomach turn. Hidden among the hay in the corner of the stall were several pieces of green walnut hulls, toxic to horses, and definitely not something that would naturally be found in their barn. Someone had deliberately poisoned their horse. Elena's hands shook as she sent Catherine running to fetch the neighbor, Mr. Peterson, who knew about treating sick animals. As she worked to keep Molly calm and walking the only treatment that might save her, Elena realized their mysterious tormentor had crossed a new line. This wasn't just about driving them off their land anymore. Someone was willing to kill innocent animals to achieve their goal, and if they were willing to hurt animals, what would stop them from hurting people? The sharp crack of splintering wood jolted Elena awake in the dead of night. Her eyes snapped open to complete darkness. But something felt terribly wrong. The air tasted strange, thick and bitter, like burnt coffee mixed with fear. Little Nathan's cries pierced through the silence from the children's room down the hall. Elena threw off her thin blanket and rushed barefoot across the cold wooden floor. The house felt different somehow, as if danger was creeping through every crack and corner. "Mama! Mama!" Nathan's voice called out. Even though his real mama had been gone for 2 long years, the fever had taken hold of him like a wild animal, shaking his tiny body until his teeth chattered like rain on a tin roof. Elena burst into the children's room to find Catherine sitting on the edge of Nathan's bed, her 9-year-old face streaked with tears that caught the moonlight streaming through the window. The little girl looked up, with eyes full of worry that no child should ever have to carry. "Miss Elena, he's been burning up since supper time," Catherine whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't want to wake Papa because he looked so tired after working in the fields all day. But Nathan keeps asking for water and then throwing it right back up." Elena placed her hand on Nathan's forehead and gasped. His skin felt like touching a hot stove. The fever was climbing fast, too fast. She had seen this kind of sickness before, back when she was married to her first husband. If they didn't bring Nathan's temperature down soon, he could slip away forever. "Catherine, you did the right thing by staying with him," Elena said, trying to keep her voice calm, even though her heart was racing like a spooked horse. "Now I need you to be brave and help me. Can you do that?" The little girl nodded, wiping her nose on her nightgown sleeve. "What do we need to do?" Elena was about to answer when her nose caught something that made her blood turn cold. Smoke. Not the good kind that came from a cozy fireplace, but the sharp, dangerous smell of a real fire, somewhere it shouldn't be. She ran to the window and looked out into the yard. Orange light was dancing on the barn walls like an evil spirit. Flames were already licking up the sides of the building where Benjamin kept all their animals in winter feed. "Oh no," Elena breathed. The barn was their lifeline. Without it, they would lose everything: their horses, their milk cow, all the hay they needed to feed the animals through the winter, and the tools Benjamin used to work their land. Through the window, she could see Benjamin already outside in his long underwear and boots, running back and forth with buckets of water. But the fire was spreading faster than one man could fight. The flames seemed to have a mind of their own, jumping from board to board like they knew exactly where to go to cause the most damage. Elena's mind raced. Nathan needed help right away, but Benjamin needed help too. How could she be in 2 places at once? How could she choose between saving a child's life and saving everything this family owned? The sound of crackling wood grew louder, Through the thin walls of the house, she could hear Benjamin shouting commands, to no one in particular. Get back, stay away from the hay. But there was no one there to hear him, except the frightened animals trapped inside. Little William appeared in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "What's all that noise?" he asked. Then he saw his baby brother tossing and turning on the bed, and his face went white as fresh snow. "William, I need you to listen very carefully," Elena said, kneeling down so she was eye level with the 6-year-old boy. "Your little brother is very sick, and there's a fire in the barn. I'm going to take Nathan outside, where the cool air might help him breathe better. But I need you and Catherine to stay close to me at all times. Do you understand?" Both children nodded, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. They had already lost their mama, and now their whole world seemed to be falling apart around them. Elena scooped Nathan up in her arms, wrapping him tight in his quilt. His little body felt like holding a bundle of hot coals. She had to get him outside quickly, but she also couldn't leave Benjamin to fight the fire alone. "Catherine, take William's hand," Elena ordered as she headed for the door. "We're going to the root cellar where you'll be safe from the smoke and fire. I want you to stay there with your brothers until either your papa or I come to get you. No matter what you hear outside, don't come out until we tell you it's safe." They stumbled outside into the yard, where the night air was thick with smoke and glowing bits of ash that floated down like deadly snow. The barn was now completely covered in flames that reached up toward the stars like orange fingers trying to grab the sky. Benjamin was closer to the fire than any person should be, throwing bucket after bucket of water at the flames. But it was like trying to stop a river with a teacup. The fire was too big, too hungry, too fast. Elena ran with the children toward the root cellar, a small underground room where they stored potatoes and carrots through the winter. It would be cool down there, away from the heat and smoke. Maybe the cold air would help bring Nathan's fever down. She settled the children in the cellar, making sure Nathan was wrapped tight and that Catherine and William were holding onto each other. "I'll be back as soon as I can," she promised. "Take care of each other." Then Elena did something that surprised even herself. Instead of staying with the sick child like any sensible woman would do, she ran straight toward the burning barn and the man who was fighting a battle he couldn't win alone. The heat hit her like walking into an oven. Sparks flew everywhere, landing on her nightgown and singeing her hair. But she didn't care. Benjamin had saved her from a life of misery and given her a chance at happiness. Now it was her turn to save him. "Elena, get back!" Benjamin shouted when he saw her running toward him with another bucket of water. "It's too dangerous. Not without you," she shouted back, throwing water at the flames that were trying to spread to the chicken coop. "We fight this together or not at all." For the next hour, they worked side by side, passing buckets back and forth, trying to save what they could. The barn was lost. They both knew that. But if they could keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings, they might still have a chance to rebuild their lives. Elena's hands were blistered and raw from the rope handles of the water buckets. Her nightgown was torn and blackened with soot. But she didn't stop. Every time Benjamin looked like he might give up, she was there beside him, ready with another bucket, another word of encouragement. The fire seemed to have a personality of its own, almost like it was alive and angry. It would die down in one spot, making them think they were winning, then suddenly flare up somewhere else, twice as fierce as before. As they fought the flames, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this fire wasn't an accident. It had started in too many places at once. The way it spread seemed too planned, too perfect. Someone had done this on purpose, but who would want to destroy everything Benjamin had worked so hard to build? Just as she was thinking these dark thoughts, she heard voices coming from beyond the firelight. Men's voices, talking low and careful, like they didn't want to be heard. Elena grabbed Benjamin's arm and pointed toward the darkness past the burning barn. 3 figures were standing there, watching the fire like they were enjoying a show at the county fair. One of the figures stepped forward into the orange glow of the flames, and Elena's heart sank like a stone thrown in deep water. It was Cornelius Hartwell, the man who had wanted to buy Benjamin's land for months, and he wasn't alone. Well, well. Cornelius Hartwell's voice cut through the crackling of the dying flames like a knife through butter. What a terrible shame to see such a fine barn go up in smoke. Elena felt Benjamin's muscles tense beside her as they both stared at the three men who had appeared like ghosts in the night. Hartwell stood in the middle, his expensive coat clean and pressed despite the late hour. His two hired hands flanked him like guard dogs, their faces hidden in shadow but their intentions clear as daylight. "You," Benjamin said, his voice low and dangerous. "What are you doing on my property at this hour?" Hartwell smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached his eyes. It was the smile of a snake watching a mouse run in circles. "I was riding back from town when I saw the glow in the sky. Thought maybe I could lend a helping hand to a neighbor in need." Elena stepped closer to Benjamin, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. There was something wrong about this whole situation. The way Hartwell stood there so calm and clean, while everything around them was destroyed. The way his men kept looking at each other like they shared a secret joke. "Help?" Benjamin's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "The only help you've ever offered is trying to buy my land for half what it's worth." Now, Hartwell said, pulling out a white handkerchief and dabbing at his forehead like the heat from the fire was bothering him. "Business is business, but this is different. This is about being neighborly." And speaking of neighborly, his eyes shifted to Elena, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Folks in town have been talking about your living arrangements here." Elena felt her cheeks burn, but not from the heat of the fire. She knew what Hartwell was suggesting, and it made her angry enough to spit nails. "My arrangements are none of your business or anyone else's." "Oh, but they are," Hartwell said, taking a step closer. "See, when a man takes in a woman with a questionable past, people start to wonder about his judgment. They start to question whether he's the kind of person they want to do business with." Benjamin moved in front of Elena like a shield. "Say what you came to say, Hartwell, then get off my land." Hartwell's fake smile got even wider. "I'm just saying that a man in your position might want to consider my offer more seriously. Especially now that you've got no barn, no feed for your animals, and winter coming on fast. $40 for the whole spread. Take it or leave it." Elena gasped. $40 was less than what Benjamin had paid just for her debts at the auction. The land alone was worth 10 times that much, and Hartwell knew it. "That's robbery," Elena said before she could stop herself. Hartwell's eyes turned cold as ice in January. "Careful, woman. You're in no position to be making accusations. After all, who's going to believe the word of someone who was sold at a livestock auction against a respected businessman?" The words hit Elena like a slap across the face. All her old fears came rushing back, the shame, the helplessness, the feeling that she was worth less than the chickens she'd been sold alongside. But then she felt Benjamin's hand find hers in the darkness, and something inside her straightened up like a flower, turning toward the sun. "I believe her," Benjamin said quietly. "And I believe you had something to do with this fire." Hartwell laughed, but it sounded forced now, like he was trying too hard to seem innocent. "That's a serious accusation, Crawford. I hope you've got proof to back up such talk." "Maybe I do," said a new voice from the darkness. Everyone turned to see old Pete Murphy, Benjamin's nearest neighbor, stepping into the circle of firelight. Pete was pushing 70 years old, but he still had eyes like a hawk and ears that could hear a pin drop in a thunderstorm. "Pete," Benjamin said, relief clear in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Saw the glow from my place and came to help," Pete said, but his eyes never left Hartwell's face. "Good thing I did. Real interesting conversation you folks are having here." Hartwell's confident smile flickered like a candle in the wind. "Mr. Murphy, I didn't see you there." "No, I don't suppose you did," Pete said, spitting into the dirt at Hartwell's feet. "You were too busy making threats and trying to steal a man's land while his barn burned down around him." One of Hartwell's hired men stepped forward, his hand moving toward his belt where Elena could see the outline of a gun. Maybe the old man should mind his own business. "Tom," Hartwell said sharply. That's enough. But Pete Murphy didn't back down. He'd lived through the Civil War and wasn't afraid of some bully with a gun. Funny thing about fires, he said, his voice steady as bedrock. They usually start from lightning or a knocked-over lantern. But this one started in 3 different places at once, almost like someone poured kerosene around the barn and lit it up deliberate-like. Elena felt hope flutter in her chest like a bird trying to take flight. If Pete had seen something, maybe they could prove what Hartwell had done. But Hartwell was already backing away, motioning for his men to follow. Well, this has been educational, but I should be getting home. Think about my offer, Crawford. With winter coming and no way to feed your stock, you might find it more reasonable than you think. As the 3 men disappeared into the darkness, Elena realized she could hear crying coming from the direction of the root cellar. Nathan, in all the excitement and fear, she'd almost forgotten about the sick little boy. Benjamin, the children, she said, running toward the cellar. They found Nathan worse than before, his fever spiking so high that he was barely conscious. Catherine and William huddled together in the corner, scared and confused by all the noise and commotion above ground. Elena knew they were facing the most important battle yet. Not against fire or bad men, but against the sickness that was trying to steal away the littlest member of their family. And this was a fight where no amount of water buckets or brave words would be enough. She looked at Benjamin, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes. They had saved the house and the other buildings, but could they save Nathan? And even if they could, what kind of future did they have with Hartwell circling like a vulture, waiting for them to fail? The night was far from over, and Elena had a feeling the hardest part was still to come. Catherine's terrified scream split the smoky night air like a knife through butter. Elena's blood turned to ice as she heard what lay beneath that cry. Nathan was dying, and she was the only one who could save him. Racing toward the root cellar where she'd hidden the children, Elena's mind battled between 2 impossible choices. Behind her, Benjamin fought alone against flames that were winning the war against their home. Ahead of her, a 3-year-old boy burned with fever that could steal his life before morning came. She couldn't be in 2 places at once, but both needed her desperately. The wooden cellar door felt heavy as stone when she pulled it open. Catherine sat cradling Nathan's small body, her own face pale with terror. Elena, he won't wake up. He's so hot, and his breathing sounds funny. Elena dropped to her knees beside them, pressing her hand against Nathan's forehead. The heat radiating from his skin made her gasp. This wasn't just sickness. This was the kind of fever that could damage a child's mind or stop his heart completely. She'd seen it before, back when she was married, when her neighbor's baby had burned up from the inside and never woke again. William, I need you to be very brave, Elena said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. Run to the well and bring back the coldest water you can carry. Fill every bucket, every pot, every bowl you can find. The 6-year-old nodded solemnly and disappeared into the smoky darkness. Elena gathered Nathan into her arms, feeling how his little body shook with chills, even though his skin burned like a stove. Catherine watched with wide eyes as Elena began stripping away the boy's clothes. Is he going to die like Mama did? Catherine whispered. Elena's throat tightened, but she kept her hands steady. Not if I can help it, sweetheart. But I need you to help me fight for him. When William returned with the first bucket of cold water, Elena began the battle for Nathan's life. She soaked strips of cloth and laid them across his burning forehead, changing them every few minutes as they grew warm. She held him upright when his breathing became labored, rubbing his back in gentle circles her own mother had taught her years ago. The sound of the barn collapsing in a shower of sparks and ash reached them even in the cellar. Elena knew Benjamin must be heartbroken. That barn held most of their farm tools, their winter feed for the animals, and months of hard work. But she couldn't leave Nathan, not when each breath he took sounded like a struggle. Catherine proved herself a helper beyond her years, bringing fresh water without being asked, and holding Nathan's hand while Elena prepared willow bark tea from the strips she kept in her apron pocket. The bitter medicine was hard to get into the unconscious boy. But Elena persisted, drop by drop, knowing it was their best hope against the fever. Hours crawled by like wounded animals. Elena's back ached from bending over Nathan, her arms trembled from holding him, and her eyes burned from smoke and exhaustion. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't dare believe it, Nathan's breathing began to ease. His skin started to cool under the damp cloths. His eyelids fluttered once, then twice. "Nathan?" Catherine whispered, leaning close to her little brother's face. The boy's eyes opened, unfocused but alive. He looked around in confusion before his gaze settled on Elena's face. "Elena? I don't feel good." Tears of relief ran down Elena's cheeks as she pulled him closer. "I know, little one, but you're going to be fine now. You're going to be just fine." When Benjamin finally found them in the cellar, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky pink and gold, he stopped in the doorway like a man seeing a mirror. Elena sat on the dirt floor, with Nathan sleeping peacefully in her lap, Catherine curled against her side, and William's head resting on her shoulder. All three children were safe, alive, and trusting her completely. "The barn?" Elena asked quietly, not wanting to wake the children. "Gone," Benjamin said simply. "Everything in it. But looking at this," he gestured to the scene before him, "I think I know what really matters." Something had changed in Benjamin's eyes as he watched Elena with his children. Gone was the careful politeness of an employer with his hired help. Gone was the distant gratitude of a man accepting charity. What remained was something warmer, deeper, more dangerous to Elena's carefully guarded heart. "You saved him," Benjamin said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my boy." Elena shook her head. "We saved him, all of us together." But Benjamin was already moving closer, kneeling beside them in the dirt. When Nathan's small hand reached out and grabbed Elena's finger even in sleep, Benjamin saw something that changed everything. This wasn't just a woman working off a debt. This wasn't just someone helping his family survive. This was someone who belonged here. Someone who fought for his children as fiercely as their own mother would have. "Elena," he said softly, and the way he spoke her name held promises neither of them was ready to put into words. Outside, Cornelius Hartwell and his men had disappeared with the darkness, but Elena knew they would return. Men like Hartwell didn't give up when they wanted something, and he wanted Benjamin's land badly enough to burn and threaten and destroy. The fight wasn't over. It had barely begun. But as Nathan stirred in her arms and smiled up at her with sleepy contentment, Elena realized something important. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. Somewhere between the auction block and this smoky cellar, between fear and trust, between obligation and choice, she had found a family worth protecting. The question was whether she was strong enough to keep them safe from the storms still coming their way. 6 months later, Willow Creek buzzed with the news that Benjamin Crawford had asked Elena Garrison to be his wife. The proposal came not with grand gestures or flowery speeches, but during a quiet moment as they worked together to rebuild the barn, their hands accidentally touching as they reached for the same nail. "I've been thinking," Benjamin said, his voice careful but determined, "about foundations. How the strongest ones are built on trust and mutual respect, not just need or convenience." Elena looked up from the board. She was holding steady, seeing in his eyes not desperation or loneliness, but genuine regard. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd be honored if you'd consider building something permanent with me, not because of debts or obligations, but because—" he paused, searching for words. "Because somewhere between the chickens and the fire and watching you save my son's life, I realized I can't imagine facing tomorrow without you." The wedding was simple, held in the meadow where they'd first talked about dreams bigger than survival. Cornelius Hartwell had left town after federal marshals began investigating reports of arson and extortion, taking his threats and manipulations with him. As Elena spoke, her vows surrounded by the children who had become hers not through birth but through choice. She reflected on the journey from that awful day at the auction block. She'd learned that worth wasn't something others could assign or take away. It was something she carried within herself, revealed not in moments of comfort but in acts of courage, compassion, and connection. The Nebraska wind carried the scent of new grass and possibility, as Benjamin slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. Around them, the rebuilt barn stood strong against the prairie sky, its foundations deep and sure, much like the love they'd discovered growing in the spaces between obligation and choice, between necessity and desire, between who they'd been forced to be and who they'd chosen to become.